A reading of Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. And hope is sweetest in the gale. Sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept and has kept so many warm. I've heard it. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity has it asked a crumb of me. The Spirit is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
Good morning and welcome to Northminster. Today is the first Sunday in Advent, but for many it's also the first Sunday in a holiday season that may prove to be particularly difficult. Inability to travel or to gather with family or friends may bring new layers of darkness to this season where so many are already waiting for light. Of course, there are no magic religious words to get rid of pain, and we do not dare dishonor grief by trying to push past it, but there is something that we can offer, and that is the simple assurance that you do not travel this road alone. Starting today and over the next 4 weeks, we travel together on this road and practice waiting. We wait for first light, for wounds to heal, for glimpses of the hope, peace, joy, and love that are rumored to soon be born into this world. To all who are veterans of the dark road, to all who are new to the darkness, and to all who may be catching the first glimpses of light, you are welcome here at this resting place of remembering and waiting.
As we embark on this active waiting together, we invite you to be mindful of what that means about how you engage actively with this service. Make a choice about how you'll relate to your phone during this hour. Don't just go on autopilot. Or if it helps you to scribble down thoughts while you're listening, take a second to go grab a pen and paper. And whenever you're ready, let's gather here and begin with a deep breath in and out. Allowing our minds and our spirits to catch up with our bodies in really arriving for this moment.
Now, to begin our time together, would you join me in this blessing? We gather to practice waiting well, as a mother practices waiting for the birth of new life. We gather in the tension between the world that is and the world that God imagines. We gather to practice submitting our imaginations to God, our hands, our voice, our wealth, and our power, as we wait for hope to be born anew. Let us worship God together this morning.
Our opening hymn of hope, "All my hope on God is founded," as true and profound as that first line is, becomes even more meaningful as we learn that it was written at a time of utter despair, the 30 Years' War, and became the inspiration for its composer Herbert Howells, who created the hymn tune after the death of his young son. God's grace alone calls us to be God's own. Heeding that call gives us assurance that no matter the calamity, we shall not fail.
There's a prayer that often finds its way into church services on the first Sunday of Advent, a prayer that didn't start out its life as a prayer at all. In 1979, these words were included in a homily offered by a Catholic bishop here in the U.S. at a Mass in memory of priests who had died. In it, that bishop reflected on the never-finished nature of priestly work, which in reality is true of all our work. There is always more to do, and there is always work that is left undone. Hope is found somewhere in the tangled, messy tension of what we long for, of what we are working for here and now, and in what seeds have been planted which may take time to come to fruition. Just a few short months after that homily was delivered, another priest, Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, was assassinated, murdered while delivering a homily for his preaching of a gospel of liberation and peace in a war-torn land. And when he was killed, that tangled, messy tension came to the forefront, the tension of the world he longed for and preached about, of the work he had accomplished in the here and now, and of the seeds he had planted and watered, waiting for the day they would come to fruition, a day he would never see. And perhaps that is why, over time, these words came to be attributed to Archbishop Oscar Romero, even though he never spoke them. So as we walk together through desperate times, waiting this morning for hope to be born, may these words offer us a glimpse of the long view as we pray them together today. Would you join me in prayer? It helps now and then to step back and take the long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. But this is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something, and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. Amen.
For A reading from the Wisdom of Job, chapter 17. My spirit is broken, my days extinguished, the grave mine. Surely mockers are with me, and my eye looks on their rebellion. Take my guarantee. Who else is willing to make an agreement? We've closed their minds to insight, therefore you won't be exalted. They denounce his friends for gain, and their children's eyes fail. They make me a popular proverb. I'm like spit in people's face. My eye is weak from grief, my limbs like a shadow, all of them. Those who do the right thing are amazed at this. The guiltless become troubled about the godless. The innocent clings to their way. The one whose hands are clean grows stronger. But you can bring all of them again, and I won't find a wise one among you. My days have passed. My goals are destroyed. My heart's desires. They turn night into day. Light is near because of the darkness. If I hope for the death as my dwelling, lay out my bed in darkness. I've called corruption my father, the worm my mother and sister. Where then is my hope? My hope? Who can see it? Will they go down with me to death? Will we descend together to the dust? A reading from the sacred poetry of hope and despair. Thanks be to God.
Where is the hope as we wait in silence? Where is the hope for the hopeless soul? Where is the hope in a world full of loneliness? Where is the hope when we can't be whole? Where is the hope that can keep us hoping? Where is the hope that helps us to go on? Where is the hope that lifts us out of darkness? That the night will break forth into the dawn. Hope is love, come forth as a rose before blooming, with the promise of peace, goodwill, and justice for all. Hope lies beneath a bright heavenly light, shining on a lowly cattle stall. Even the beasts of the field are bowing in awe and reverence at the sight of the hope of the world so long awaited. This poor child born this holy night. peace on earth. Where is this hope for a world in which everyone thinks of each other as people of worth? Where is this hope that was promised in Bethlehem? Where is this hope that made shepherds rejoice? Where is this hope for a world free of poverty, war, and disease? Who can make it so? Who can give hope a voice? Hope is found in our bodies and our souls, in our hearts and hands and feet and our will to do the work that God inspires. With Christ at our side, we find our hope when we are tasks fulfilled. Hope has come in the form of a child, a promise for all humankind, the dawn of peace and justice for all. Hope comes from love divine.
A while back, Claire and I had the opportunity to wander for a while through a museum whose sole focus was on freedom of the press. It was playfully called the Newseum. They had exhibits on just about every news-related story you could imagine, on every leap forward and every boundary crossed. But among those exhibits, there's this one that I'm never going to forget. After a long day of walking, I rounded a corner to find myself in the midst of an installment on Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs. It was this dimly lit, round gallery, inviting its guests to walk through a timeline of prize-winning photographs, starting in 1942 and ending in the present. This large embossed quote from Eddie Adams decorated the entrance wall. It said, "If it makes you laugh, if it makes you cry, if it rips out your heart, that's a good picture." Now, anyone who's ever been to a museum, especially a large one, knows that there are some sections you just have to walk briskly through, skimming the surface and pausing every now and then. But this exhibit was different. This exhibit demanded that I stop and be still in reverence. It demanded that I pay a kind of homage to the vast spectrum of human joy and suffering hung on the walls around me. In some photographs, I saw scenes that just radiated with hope and heroism. One featured this large 18-wheeler sliding off of a bridge while ordinary men and women gathered around it to pull the desperate driver up to safety. It was incredible. There were lovers jumping into each other's arms after what must have been ages apart. There were Olympians, ablaze with glory, after performing feats that previously would have been considered superhuman. But then each of these photographs had its opposite, the reverse side of those same coins. I wasn't prepared for some of those. I wasn't prepared to see Vietnamese children naked, stumbling away from their village, screaming because of the napalm burning their skin. I wasn't prepared to see Albanian parents desperately passing a frightened infant the same age that my son was through a barbed wire fence, trying to flee a war in Kosovo. I wasn't prepared to see the fear on the faces of men and women with guns to their head, their lives ending only a few moments after the photograph was taken. As I walked on, my senses of hope and optimism proved far more fragile than I ever thought they were, and they shattered in pieces around me, cutting my feet as I walked. But for all the photographs I saw that day, there was this one that still slips unbidden into my thoughts most often. It's a piece called The Struggling Girl, even though the child in the photograph is a boy, a young Sudanese boy, no older than 3 or 4. In the photograph, you see that hunger has eaten his limbs away to almost nothing, and he has fallen with his face on the ground, helpless and alone except for a vulture 2 yards behind him, just waiting. When the photograph was published in the New York Times in 1993, the photographer, a man named Jim Carter, was widely criticized for taking this photo and for not reaching out and actually helping the child, for picking him up and helping him find food and letting him know that he wasn't alone. But Carter would admit that they were instructed not to touch the children for fear of diseases. Carter became so overwhelmed by the trauma of that experience, the helplessness of the famine and the war that he'd witnessed in Sudan, that 4 months after receiving the Pulitzer for that photograph, he took his own life. In my whole life, I have never felt as helpless as I did looking at that photograph and reading that story. It was my job, my vocation, to imagine hope, to preach hope, to trust in hope. But in that moment, I realized that until we've looked that kind of hopelessness square in its eye, then nothing we have to say about hope will be worth a damn. Of course, I thought of this story this week. It's the first week in Advent, the season where we learn to wait expectantly and actively for Christ to be born into this world. We wait for the birth of peace, joy, love, and hope. This is the week we talk about hope. My favorite image from hope comes from the late professor of pastoral care at Bright Divinity, a man whose name was Dr. Andrew Lester. And he wrote that hope could be best understood in the language of story. He asserts that each of us are living a story, responding in the present to some kind of perceived narrative trajectory of the past. But it's not just that. We don't often think about the fact that we're also living in the present in response to a perceived narrative trajectory of the future. In other words, we each have a future story, a next chapter that we anticipate living into. We have an imagination for what might be coming tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the next year. And if this imagined story that we're living into is good, then we have hope. If it's not, then we have despair. Of course, as with any story we tell, there's always the question of whether it's true. Are we really living the story that we thought we were living? Are we actually as helpless in the face of it as we thought we were? And typically, especially on the first Sunday of Advent, it's the pastor's job to ask these questions, to help us reimagine our future in light of God's story, God's redemptive imagination. We draw the kind of future that God imagines and say, in the words of Jason Robert Brown, "I know it's dark right now, but just believe somehow that soon there will be light." But today, I have to ask a different kind of question. In some ways, it's a question that we're more primed to answer this year than maybe ever before in our lifetimes. It's a question that Sudanese boy will not let me ignore. Could our idea of hope be entirely empty? When we're talking about hope, I can think of two different kinds of hope. On one hand, there's the conservative Christian kind of hope. It's a hope in the Deus ex machina. It's the hope that if we just ask the right way with enough faith in our hearts, with enough trust, that God will fix our problems, that God will heal diseases and right wrongs. God will just crash in and everything will be all right. But the problem is, I've seen far too many desperate prayers go unanswered to believe in this kind of hope. On the other hand, there's the kind of naive hope. It's the hope that road-weary activists tend to call liberal idealism. It's the kind of hope that claims that if we just love one another, if we are just kind to one another, if we go vote, then things will get better and everything will be all right. And the problem here is, I have seen too many liberals, myself included, too paralyzed by the comforts of the system that we're in, too segregated from those that they claim to love and serve to make any kind of meaningful difference. Both of these hopes, when you think about it, have merit. There is wisdom to recognizing what's beyond your control. And there is wisdom in recognizing the power of kindness to bring out the best in people. Both are important and both have their place. But when it comes to the full depth of human suffering, both are insufficient. For me, both kinds of hope shattered in the face of the pain that I saw that day in the museum. Both were exposed for what they were, different kinds of escapism. Vain beliefs that everything is going to be okay, maintained only by a buffer of privilege. The truth is, things are not always going to be okay. The truth is, for far too many, it is just the reality that they will live and die in poverty and pain, with no hope to speak of. For many of us, this year has shown just how fragile what we call hope can really be. So, this year, especially, I have to ask, could our idea of hope be entirely empty? Maybe. Probably. But here's the thing. These cheap hopes do not discount the existence of true hope any more than cheap romance novels discount the existence of true love. The truth is, real hope, just like real love, has a higher cost. And to look at that cost, to understand that kind of hope, we have to turn to the Christ story. If they were awarding Pulitzers for photography in the first century, and a photographer managed to snap a picture of Christ as a child, what do you think they would have captured? The iconographers would have us believe that we'd see a serene and regal child sitting in the lap of his straight-faced and haloed mother. But honestly, I think we ought to be skeptical. Is this really the image of a child born so poor that his birth took place in a stable alongside the livestock? Is this really the image of a child born into a nation so shadowed by an imperial superpower that anyone who dared speak a word of resistance was crucified? With respect to the iconographers, I think Christ would have looked far more like those children from Vietnam or from Sudan. Children born into poverty, pain, and hopelessness. And yet the Christ story is somehow a story of unparalleled hope. The Christ story is not a story about resignation or about depression, but it's one of a man holding lepers in his arms, preaching relentless liberation, and marching boldly towards a Roman cross, holding his executioners in his heart. How is this possible? Andrew Lester told us that when we looked into our imagined future stories and see only pain, that we are paralyzed by despair. But in the Christ story, I think that we see that that's not the whole picture. In the Christ story, we see that when we are hopeless, and we have the courage to really look that despair in the eye, the courage not to look away, then we have not a limitation, but a superpower. And that's desperation. The story of Christ is the story of one who looked deeply into his hopelessness and the hopelessness of the nation around him, who looked into a future that ended unavoidably in pain and in death, and he let it set him free. It set him free to do things that most of us would never find the courage to do, to love people that most of us never find the courage to love, to work for a future that went beyond his own life. He became, in the words often attributed to Oscar Romero, the prophet of a future not his own. Seeing no hope, in his desperation, he died to himself. And he let the God in him run loose in this world. This is real hope. Earned hope. It is a hope that can only be found along the honest road of hopelessness. If we want real hope, hope that is lasting and that is not fragile, it can only be found by looking deeply at hopelessness, by walking through the gallery of human suffering and sitting and waiting. This kind of hope can only come through the recognition that 10,000 children will die of hunger and preventable causes today. It can only come through meaningful contact with the countless children in the United States who will be denied quality education, who will be denied quality employment, who will be sentenced to a life of suspicion and violence for having had the audacity to be born poor. It can only come from opening our hearts to the 2,203 people in the United States, mostly people of color, who died yesterday of COVID-19. Having faced the decision either to go to a job that offered no protection or come home to an eviction notice tacked to their door. This kind of hope can only come from an honest acceptance of the now unstoppable effects of climate change, which call into question the very survival of our species. Hope, real and lasting hope, can never come from easy answers, can never come from escapism, can never come from naive idealism. Hope comes from a journey into the very heart of hopelessness itself. It comes from the hopelessness of Christ, which does give birth to despair. But then that despair gives birth to desperation. And in that desperation, there is the total freedom to do what we have to do. To allow God to live through you, to become the prophet of a future not your own, the future of a new heaven and a new earth. This hope through hopelessness, life through a cross, it sounds like foolishness to all who are perishing, but to those being saved, it is the very power and wisdom of God. So, people of God, on this Sunday of hope, as we journey through the darkness, waiting for the light, may we be always dissatisfied with hope that is empty or fragile. May we be dissatisfied with any hope that is threatened by suffering. May we have the courage to embrace the hopelessness of Christ, looking deeply at that from which we would rather look away or explain away, so that we might find the true desperation, the liberation, the freedom and life of Christ. May we live resurrected lives in the service of a kingdom greater than ourselves. Amen.
Come, friends, and let us sit with truth. Let us listen to her wisdom, uncomfortable though it may be, because in her courage we are set free.
We are of the nature to grow old. From old age there is no hope of escape. We are of the nature to grow ill. From sickness there is no hope of escape.
We are of the nature to die sooner or later. From death there is no hope of escape. We are of the nature to change. All that is dear to us, all that we love will fade. From separation, from loss, there is no hope of escape.
We are of the nature to be held accountable for the consequences of our lives. From justice, there is no hope of escape. Come, friends, let us sit with truth. Let us listen to her wisdom, uncomfortable though it may be. She shatters our hopes, fragile and frail, which were never real hopes to begin with.
But if we can endure the pain, if we can keep company with the stillness and the silence, in the embrace of the unembraceable,
then what remains is no cheap escape, no empty idealism, no lasting despair, but freedom.
What remains is the pure freedom to truly live, planting seeds that one day will grow.
what remains is a willingness to yield to the sufferings of the present so that a new future may be born.
What remains is hope.
Come, friends, let us sit with truth, because in her courage we are set free. Amen.
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 Sitting around the table for his last Passover supper, Jesus knew what waited for him the next day. He knew that he was out of options, and that from his death, there was no escape.
He refused to fight back, and he refused to give up. And so in his desperation, he found a third way. Victory not through dominance, but through death. Not born of an empty hope, but through the courage born of true hopelessness.
Taking the bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it, saying, "Take and eat, all of you. This is my body, broken for you. As often as you eat it, do this in memory of me."
Taking the cup, he gave thanks, and he poured it, saying, "Take and drink, all of you. This is the new covenant of unconditional grace, sealed in my poured out life. As often as you drink from it, do this in remembrance of me."
As often as we eat this bread and drink this wine, we share in the desperation of Christ. And we are nourished as prophets of a future, not our own. Amen.
Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope that this pause has given you space to rest, to glimpse the kingdom for which we work and wait. In a moment, we'll sing a closing hymn and give our benediction, but first, a few quick announcements.
The Arts Commission is creating a virtual exhibit of the art of Ellen Prather, featuring her wonderful collection of hand-painted Christmas cards she's done for friends and family over the past 20 or so years. This approximately 15-minute presentation will be premiered on YouTube this week and remain up during the Advent and Christmas seasons. We will send a constant contact announcing the time for the premiere. However, you will be able to access this loving Christmas card to the church at any time during the season. We will place a link on the website. Thank you so much, Ellen.
If you're looking for a way to engage with the biblical story this Advent, we began our Advent Sunday School series this morning, and you are welcome to join us for any of the 3 remaining Sundays, whether or not you were with us this morning. The series is called No Christmas Without Her and explores the stories of the 4 women included in Jesus' genealogy in the first chapter of Matthew. And you can continue to find that Zoom link in the newsletter. And as always, if you find life, if you find meaning in what we gather in this space to do each week, we invite you to take a moment to contribute so that we'll be able to continue in this work. You can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can always go to northman.org/give.
Now, before we offer our benediction, let's join together in our closing hymn.
20th century poet-writer Jane Parker Huber authored many hymns based on the themes of peacemaking, justice, and inclusiveness. We close our service today with a command to live into hope, of freeing captives, regaining sight, and ending greed and oppression in the first 3 verses by Reverend Huber. Verses 4 and 5 by D.H. Clark speak to the culmination of that hope in a feast of thanksgiving, and concludes with a paraphrase of Northminster's watchword, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God.
And now, people of God, receive this benediction. The time has come to leave this rest stop and return to the road, to return again to the journey in the darkness, walking on as we wait for the dawn. We return again to live in the tension between the world that is and the world that God imagines. We return, our imaginations seasoned by the God imagination, waiting for hope to be born anew. You are seen and you are loved. Go in peace.